Ladies and gentlemen, today we have with us Professor Qingming Luo, Professor Steve Dahms, and our author Professor Dahsuan Feng. Professor Luo and Professor Dahms will be discussing with the author on his new book, China's Millennium Transformation Belt and Road Initiative, published by World Scientific Publishing Co. Before we begin, let us share with you some information on the professors and the book. Professor Luo is the president of Hainan University and member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Professor Dahms is an Emeritus Distinguished Professor at San Diego State University and University of California, San Diego, Consulting Vice President of the Academic, Industry, and Government Affairs of Southern California Biomedical Council. Professor Feng is the chairman of Hainan University International Advisory Board and former vice president for research at University of Texas at Dallas. This book was published in 2020 and elucidates the unique journey and views of the author in exploring and analyzing some of the possible outcomes of the Belt and Road Initiative.
And now I will pass the time to our host, Professor Dahms.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wee. It is a delight being with you and the audience today. A delight in hosting this discussion regarding the very impactful book from Professor Feng. The format for our conversation with Professor Feng will be the following. I will say a few words resulting from my reading of Professor Feng's book. This will be followed by comments from President Luo regarding his most recent book from Professor Feng. President Luo will then pose two sequential questions to Professor Feng, to which Professor Feng will respond. I will then take the opportunity to likewise pose two sequential questions to Professor Feng, to which he will also respond. Then Professor Feng will be fully unleashed to discuss in greater detail his important book. Now, as to my comments on the book. My conversations and exchanges with Professor Feng over the past 15 years or so have always been very exciting and dynamic, as he is one of the world's most networked people. Very recently, as a result of his unusual catalytic and stimulatory role, I've delved into aspects of the BRI, and I've especially enjoyed rereading the sections of my as yet unsigned copy of President Xi Jinping's 2013 informative book, The Governance of China, where he introduces the Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road of the 21st century. That is the One Belt and One Road initiative. I found Professor Feng's book to carefully and thoroughly detail several exceptional personal journeys that all coalesced about 4 years ago with his near cosmic Big Bang style genesis of his thinking and actions with regard to the BRI, and his probing of the BIR's influence on China policy and geopolitical aspirations, especially regarding relationships with other countries in Asia. In his book, he identifies three intellectually appealing themes and potential outcomes. Outcome number one would bring Asia and Europe together as a supercontinent. Outcome number two would stimulate and foster a neo-Renaissance mode of thinking across the area and well beyond. And thirdly, outcome number three would bring about a real change in how China communicates with the rest of the world as regards its cultural history and underpinnings. He does this in a way as a sort of storyteller, marvelously detailing his broad swept progress in science and philosophy and technology, and indeed personal affairs. And all of his various paths that he now recognizes have ultimately merged and fused and led him to probe and explore the depths and benefits of the BIR concept. From one perspective, Professor Feng's path is not unlike one of the early enlightened Middle Eastern desert prophet philosophers. Remembering, of course, that the word prophet suggests one who projects the future. The book is a sort of a prophecy, which could be enabled, as the book details, at the end with 3 potentially powerful set of recommendations for China as how it might promote the BR philosophy, all the while seeking the 3 outcomes. Lastly, Professor Feng usually provides his pertinent quotations. Professor Feng usually provides for us pertinent quotations of others in leadership roles, quotations to support his ideas and actions. He missed one quotation that pertains directly to the BIR concept. It is a short but meaningful quotation attributed to a US newspaper editor, Horace Greeley, a quotation worthy of President Xi Jinping, a quotation that concerns expansion and development westward. The quotation is quite simple: "Go west, young man." That short quotation is recognized as one of the 19th century's most influential quotations. Well, that having been said, I now turn over the floor to President Luo regarding his comments on the book.
All right, thank you, Dan. Now here's my comment. The Belt and Road Initiative was proposed by China's President Xi Jinping in 2013. It is an international economic cooperation initiative aiming to enhance regional connectivity and strengthen practical collaboration. It encourages countries to work together to address the risks and challenges facing all human beings. In doing so, mutual benefits and joint progresses can be achieved. After 7 years of development, the BRI has become the most popular public product around the world and an international cooperation platform with the greatest potential. As we know, Professor Dahsuan Feng was born in India, grew up in Singapore, studied and worked in the United States, and took many long-term positions across China. Based on such a unique background and life experiences, Professor Feng wrote this new book, China's Millennium Transformation, Belt and Road Initiative. Writing from a unique perspective, he elaborates on how the Belt and Road Initiative influenced and changed the millennium-old mindsets of Chinese people. Now, the world is facing a global power shift, which we have never seen in the past 100 years. So Professor Feng's new book may provide the international community with a new perspective and a new approach to address this shift better. So that's my comments.
Well, thank you, Professor Luo. Professor Luo, President Luo, would you now provide a question to Dr. Feng, the first of 2 questions?
Okay. Here's my question. The first one is, in what ways does this book help readers from Western countries to get a better understanding of China's Belt and Road Initiative and China's current development?
Thank you very much, Qingming, for asking this question about the Belt and Road Initiative, which I will refer to as BRI from now on. In writing this book, I hope I can provide Westerners, and in fact the world in general, an opportunity to view the BRI with a different perspective. Even more important, I also hope that I'm not too ambitious, that through the BRI, the Chinese people may realize how through the BRI it could transform its mindset and render China as a nation with long and deep and proud history and culture be beneficial to the world. Your question, and I quote, "To get a better understanding of China's BRI implies that there exists misunderstanding. With that, I think whether it be accidental or deliberate, such is indeed the case. Although the question raised is not one that I had in mind in writing the book, still, as someone who became infatuated by the BRI, I cannot help but became aware that the Western media in the past 7 years often made distorted reports about the BRI. Let me give you one example. In fact, way before the idea of the BRI was proposed in 2013, as was mentioned, for more than 3 decades, China had already invested and worked heavily in Africa, economically and technologically, even culturally. For this, I would strongly suggest everyone to go to the YouTube and listen to the lectures of Professor Deborah Browtingham of Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. In her lectures, and I was totally amazed by it, Professor Browtingham, who has carried out and is still carrying out in-depth field research in Africa about how China operates on that continent. Many of the projects which the Western media claimed to be the Chinese way of taking advantage of the Africans through her field research and or internet forensics were either misrepresented or simply wrong. Here, I would like to congratulate Professor Browtingham, who had the courage to conduct her research with the best scientific methodology, with observations who are data-driven. Having said that, not being a social scientist myself, nor an economist, I was more interested to ask what I thought was a fundamental question, and that is how the BRI could impact the Chinese mindset in the modern era, and how such a transformed mindset can impact humanity in general. I wanted the world, which includes China, by the way, to go beyond the complexities of geopolitics and geoeconomics, which are primarily and superficially the reasons why how the media forms the attitude towards the BRI. After all, China is a vast country of long and deep history. Today, as one of the 2 most economically powerful nations in the world, for it to initiate something as powerful as the BRI, how it can enhance humanity's betterment is what I'm deeply concerned with. I think in the end, this was the reason for the appearance of the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feng. Dr. Lo, would you pose the second question, please?
Yeah, Professor Feng, I'm in Hainan. So my second question is how to integrate China's strategic initiative to develop the Hainan free trade port with the development of the Belt and Road countries, especially the countries in Southeast Asia and South Asia, such as India. To my knowledge, Dr. Feng knows these Asian countries very well. So that's my concern.
Well, President Lo, you clearly know me very well. I was born in India, as you said, and I grew up in Singapore. So Southeast Asia, namely Singapore and Malaysia at least, and South Asia, namely India, are part of my DNA. Although the mission of the Free Trade Port, FTP, is primarily economics, I'm not an economist nor a social scientist, but I think I'm not too wrong to say that the success and the implementation of the FTP rests on the foundation of how China comprehends other countries' cultures, other countries' histories, and their ways and means. Since Southeast Asia and South Asia are China's close neighbors, and the FTP must affect these regions very, very closely, it is really incumbent upon China to gain a deeper understanding of these regions of Asia. One of the members of Hainan University's International Advisory Board, and you know him very well, and both of you know him very well, Professor Bali Deepak of the Jawaharlal Nehru University of India, said that he wanted Indians to understand the mindset of China. To do so, he made the colossal intellectual effort of translating the 4 books, 四书, the core of Chinese mindset, into Hindi. I have hoped that by having Professor Deepak on our board, we can significantly generate interest in Hainan, in our understanding of the this complex nation called India. Mm-hmm. I believe in my book, I mentioned that China needs to, quote unquote, culturally communicate with people of different cultures, histories, and ways and means. What Professor Deepak had done could indeed be a guiding light for us. This is especially so about Hainan province, because in Southeast Asia, a significant percentage of Chinese diasporas are Hainanese. These are Southeast Asians who not only understand Hainan, but also understand the vast and complex diversities of the region. For example, Malaysia's primary people in Malaysia are Malays, and they speak the same language as Indonesians. They have a different culture, and it is important, and also they hold strong political power. In this area, I think Hainan University could take the lead in this direction for the Hainan province. Let me also add a few words regarding India. As you know, I have said this in the book. My father, Paul Feng, in 1946, January 20th, interviewed the soon-to-be Prime Minister of the newly independent India in New Delhi. In the interview, Nehru said 12 immortal words to him, which is, if China and India hold together, the future of Asia is assured. Ever since I learned that 12 words later on in my life, they have become my motto. I hope that these two nations, China and India, with 40% of humanity and with profound history, studded with enormous wisdom, can work together to help the world to mitigate its current existential challenges. To this end, Hainan University, under your leadership, President Luo, is now in the position to become the platform for China and India to pursue this cross-cultural understanding. In fact, I think that perhaps Hainan University could have a new motto, and that is, if China and India hold together, the world is assured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feng. President Luo, do you have any other comments you would like to make at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's now time for me to ask the first of my 2 questions. The question is a very simple one, but it's complex. Since 2013, professional analysts and mainstream media have referred to the Belt and Road Initiative as the Marshall Plan of China. Is this simply the rhetoric of an eye-catching term, or are there substantive differences in the 2 main BIR outcomes, the 3 main BIR outcomes, especially the highly transformative outcomes that you so elegantly and precisely identify in your book?
Thank you, Steve, for this very important and tantalizing question. The question was raised soon after BRI was initiated. People continue to ask that question even today. The Marshall Plan, or its official name, the European Recovery Program, is designated to Western European nations. Its brainchild was the then Secretary of State, George Marshall. For the BRI, though it was initiated by China, it was from the very start intended to be a many-to-many effort as an initiative. The multi-regional and multinational win-win effort is distinctly different from the one-to-many effort of the Marshall Plan. Of course, at that time, right after World War II, no other country in the world that would have sufficient monetary strength or political power, for that matter, could possibly work with the United States, probably not even the Soviet Union at that time. In this sense, it is not the same. However, there's one aspect which you may consider as similar. Interestingly, the vast amount of funding using today's dollar value, which is around $200 billion, to rebuild the war-torn countries in Europe. Looking back at the Marshall Plan, I think there is no question that for the United States, it was abundantly obvious that Europe as a continent where the Renaissance had its home, where for many centuries was the intellectual epic center of the world, will recover quickly with or without the Marshall Plan. Think about it. In fact, in the 19th century, profound scientific discoveries in thermodynamics and electromagnetism, and in the 20th century, quantum mechanics, were made and almost entirely by European scientists. These discoveries transformed the world entirely, even to this day. Even though under Hitler's inhumanities, a large portion of the intellectual powerhouse left Europe, there was no question in the minds of the American leaders in the post-World War II era that Europe could and would rebuild its intellectual strength. With that, its economic strength as well. In fact, as I said earlier, with or without the Marshall Plan. With Marshall Plan, it will simply be quicker in the regeneration. The United States became one of the most powerful nations economically and militarily in the world after World War II. However, facing the competition of the Soviet Union, it wanted to make sure that Europe's soon-to-be market, and indeed there will be a vast market, especially those from Western Europe, could be within the control of the United States. I think there was no question that Marshall Plan's aim was to capture the European market. In a sense, United States succinctly and successfully became an economic colonialist in a sense. China in the 21st century has emerged as the second most economically powerful nation in the world. When the Western nations, when they became powerful, they would literally control the world as colonialists. The best example for China was during the Ming Dynasty. Admiral Zheng He led 7 powerful naval armada to Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and East Asia. It was remarkable that he brought back to China not an inch of the colony. And therefore, I think that in this sense, it is China's way of peacefully wanting to gain a market of the world through the BRI. In that sense, it is the same as the Marshall Plan.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Feng. It was very insightful. I'd like now to pose my second question. This is a highly informative, stimulating, and conceptually very appealing book, the content of which adequately reflects the scientific, academic, and administrative careers of at least a half a dozen people, rather than just one singularly distinguished, incredibly well networked, deep thinking, and culturally and philosophically attuned person. Dahsuan, what drove you to write such an insightful, captivating, and needed book? Secondly, what has your BRI journey been like? And thirdly, what are your next steps? What is your next book?
Thank you, Steve, for asking this question. For me, it was and still is an emotional question. Let me first thank you for giving the book such a high praise. Your words are in fact a tranquilizing pill for me. As I have mentioned in the preface, where I made the comment that there could be 1,000 reasons why I should not and could not write this book. However, there is one reason why I should, and that is because my cultural heritage is Chinese. Once I started to study the BRI issue, it was a surprise for me that the three main themes of the book, supercontinent, New Renaissance, and cultural communications, came to be very early on. In fact, in my very first talk I delivered in Singapore on July 5th, 2016, the primordial form of these ideas was already a part of my talk. In fact, since that memorable day in Singapore, K.K. Pua, the owner of the publishing house World Scientific, who was the chair of my speech that day, was so excited about the speech that he immediately said to me, "You must write this up as a book." My answer then was, "You're crazy." I had to think long and hard to convince myself that I am qualified to write such a book. In constructing the book's ideas, which took nearly more than a year, I kept reminding myself that what I say cannot merely be an elegant and eloquent regurgitation of what others have written. In formulating the primordial idea of the book, which is beyond simply giving a talk, it was truly torturous. During that period, I pestered myself a difficult question. The question was whether, as a former Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia, and now an American citizen, and without having a single day of schooling in the mainland, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, do I have the right and the capacity to write such a book? This question led me to dig deeper into my formative years in Singapore, as you have seen in what I wrote in the preface. How my Chinese school education infused the Chinese culture into my DNA. After that, I continued to recount my life experience in meeting people from the mainland. In fact, it may surprise you, it was not until 1972, when I had completed my PhD, I met someone from the mainland when I was already a postdoc in the University of Manchester. Then subsequently, as a young visitor at the Niels Bohr Institute in 1979, my interactions with many individuals who came to the Niels Bohr Institute made me realize, despite our enormous differences in the way we grew up, how much I had in common with them. Let me get back to the time I started to write the book. What startled me was essentially the BRI is an unwritten request on demands on the Chinese to think outwardly. In thinking about it, that is not so easy to do as it appears to be. In a sense, the BRI wants to revitalize the ancient Silk Roads, either the land-based or the maritime-based. I often ask the audience of my various talks in the what is the difference between the ancient Silk Road and the modern Silk Road, which is the Belt and Road? And they gave me all kinds of economic answers and technological answers. And my answer to them was, the difference is that in the modern Silk Road, there is Xi Jinping. And in the old days, there wasn't a Xi Jinping. Yet, the ancient Silk Road is not what we refer to modern day language as a two-way traffic. The fact that around a millennium ago in Kaifeng, China, there was already a flourishing large Jewish community who through centuries came to China through the Silk Roads. Yet there was no counterpart of Chinese communities flourishing in the western end of the Silk Roads. It is through a series of similar questions to myself that I landed in the three major themes of the book, namely supercontinent, New Renaissance, and cultural communications. Every one of these concepts, to me at least, is a transformation of mindset of Chinese and even for humanity in general. So I think my life about the BRI is only, writing such a book is only the beginning of this effort. I think I want to continue to have a voice in this conversation around the world about the BRI, about what China can do and allow Chinese to think broadly about how they as world citizens can benefit humanity in general. Whether I write another book or not, who knows? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Feng. Okay, so this is the wrap-up phase of our activity. I would like to thank you, the participants, the World Scientific Publishing for this opportunity. And I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Wei to complete this process. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Luo and Professor Feng for participating, and Professor Dahms for hosting the interview. For more information on Professor Feng's new book, please click on the link in the description provided.